Steering Committee, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's debate. This House believes that the United States is the United Kingdom's greatest ally. For some context, the Young Fabians is a youth arm of one of Britain's oldest left-wing think tanks, and if you'd like to join or feed into some of our future event ideas, please do speak to me after the debate. Before we begin, I would like to thank the team here at Big Valley Bar and Comedy Club for hosting us this evening, as well as Tobi, Indi, Ismael and Serena from Discourse Collective for helping facilitate this event. Please do check them out on Instagram. I think you all have little cards on your seats with some more information about Discourse Collective. Regarding the topic, I imagine that many of you are here this evening because you recognise, as most people do, that the so-called special relationship is one of the defining partnerships of the modern age. Whether through shared language, culture and history, or through ongoing military, economic, technological and diplomatic cooperation. The debate taking place tonight focuses not only on the UK's existing relationship with the United States, but on the future of that relationship and the value of it in a changing international context. This steering committee was elected at a moment when the special relationship appeared to be entering one of its most testing periods. It was November last year, and reports had emerged that the UK partially paused some intelligence sharing with the US following controversial American military actions in the Caribbean. That same month, the House of Lords launched inquiries into the long-term future of the UK-US relationship, reflecting growing uncertainty about the stability and predictability of the alliance. At the same time, however, the relationship has remained remarkably resilient. Britain continues to receive preferential treatment from Washington in areas where many European allies do not, and cooperation across defence, intelligence, science, trade and research continue at an extraordinary level despite political disagreements and differing approaches to the international community. Perhaps fittingly, the most recent national elections in these two countries fell on holidays celebrating two very different political ideals. Britain's 2024 general election took place on America's Independence Day, rooted in sovereignty and separation from Britain, whereas America's election fell on Britain's bonfire night, rooted in the preservation of Parliament and constitutional order. Elections are moments in which nations reaffirm their political identities and values. These dates therefore serve as reminders that the modern United States was born from separation from Britain, whereas Britain's own political identity has been shaped by the preservation of tradition and adherence to norms. And perhaps that is the deeper tension at the heart of tonight's motion. Whether the UK-US relationship is ultimately defined by independence or interdependence. Tonight, the proposition may argue that no country has contributed more consistently to Britain's security and global standing than the United States. The opposition may contend that the relationship is unequal, overstated, or increasingly unsuited to the realities of the modern world. I look forward to hearing thoughtful, respectful, and spirited contributions from both sides this evening, and I hope that everyone leaves having engaged more deeply with one of the most important questions in modern British foreign policy. For the proposition this evening, we have Indi Miller and Jack Manners. Indi works in research and advocacy, whereas Jack is an experienced speechwriter for a range of political figures. Speaking for the opposition, we have Nicole and Ismael. Nicole is a public affairs consultant and writer, while Ismael works in political engagement and communications. And with that, we're going to open the floor to a discussion about the motion, which will take place before the debate, and then we're going to have an initial vote, and then we're going to go to the proposition.
So for a quick icebreaker, which will be about 2 minutes, I want you to think about, if you weren't living in the UK, what country would you live in and why?
Okay, so I said America. My friend beside me said which city. I said New York. Why? Yeah, great job opportunities, great diversity, great transport. I have a good network there as well, so that's a more personal thing. Yeah, it's very similar to London. It has a lot of the stuff that I love about London there, so it's pretty easy for me.
Okay, cool. City life, I feel like. Anyone else? Yeah. Confidence. Oh, we'll go here first, okay.
It's funny you mentioned the US because I actually just left the US to come here.
Oh. Hey!
So for a bit of context, I am a US-UK citizen. The funny thing is, US is supposed to be land of opportunity, and I'm afraid, at least at this point, under the current political climate, that has flipped, and now the UK is the land of opportunity, and at least in the policy-making space. For some context, I used to work in DC, and with all of the stupid Doge government cuts, my job market basically imploded, and so I went back to school here, and I haven't regretted a single second of it.
Okay, cool. Thank you, yeah.
But to finally answer the question, I suggested Canada or New Zealand. Those are nice places, but they are extremely expensive. I was considering Poland as well, because based on the price for the standard of living, cost of living, thank you. Cost of living is comparatively a lot lower compared to a lot of other places. However, again, with political climate considerations, I figured that I'd have a safer bet here.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, someone there.
Okay, so obviously we've had this conversation at length and we can't decide on a place. However, for me, I would choose Singapore only because I've not been there yet, but I've heard good things in terms of safety, in terms of like the city being quite advanced, in terms of diversity a little bit, and yeah, I've heard, that's it. That's it really.
Okay, thank you. What are your thoughts on the statement? So the statement is, America is the UK's greatest ally. If you agree, you raise the thumbs up sign, and if you disagree, the thumbs down sign. Yeah. And up high, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. In general. Okay, it seems like we have 50-50. There's a lot of like greens here and a few reds over here. So, hello? Hi. So, someone with a green, do you want to explain why? Anyone? Well, the mic's going to come to you, yeah.
I think politically the UK is in quite a difficult place. I think we've burnt bridges with most of Europe, if not all of Europe. I think globally there are economic problems that are affecting most countries, but I think even with the state of the US is probably still our strongest economic country that we can have allies with. I think the president of the US isn't that smart, so I think there's things that we can benefit from as the UK. And I think, well, this is probably coming up in discussion, but I think the ally between the UK and the US is really upholding kind of a structural standard that needs to be upheld for anything in the West to keep place. I think as the world is imploding, things like education, things like access, things like white supremacy as a structure, the relationship has to maintain. Without it, then I think all these systems crumble. So.
Okay, thank you. There was a lot of thumbs down over here. So is someone over here want to say why they put a thumbs down?
I put a thumbs down because I feel ideologically the US are crumbling at the moment. And I feel like interdependent market is the best way to go for what the world looks like at the moment. And I feel that the US have dragged the UK into a situation that the UK can't handle. So that's my perspective, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? No, one more person? Okay, you guys have time to think anyway, so we're going to start off with our first speaker, who is Jack. Thank you.
Thank you. To answer the question of whether America is our greatest ally, we must first understand what allyship means and how it compares across different nations. When I think of the relationship between our two countries, pictures made of both real and imagined history flash through my mind. I see Churchill and Roosevelt planning D-Day and the liberation of Western Europe. I see Thatcher and Reagan resolute in their resistance to Soviet expansionism. I see Blair watching Bush address Congress in the wake of 9/11. Britain's Prime Minister, the President said, had crossed an ocean to show his unity of purpose with America. In all of these instances, we see two countries united by cause with a shared understanding that a threat to one is a threat to the other, and that they face it strongest when standing together. Now, I should acknowledge that some of our recently shared history inspires much debate in its own right, but nonetheless, these moments track a shared feeling across decades. It is, I believe, one of friendship, but more importantly, allyship. It is simply hard to recapture this feeling to the same extent with any other nation. Today, however, the geopolitical picture is quite different. Today, we see an America comfortable in using force to maximize its interest, an America blasé about international law, an America that prefers to cozy up to international strongmen than defend territorial integrity. Clearly, our values are diverging. So if allyship were defined by sentiment alone, it might be fair to say that ours were weakening. But allyship is not simply feeling. It is deeper than that. All of those moments I mentioned, they are surface level, but underneath them is the immovable foundation of mutual defense. It is this, I believe, more than anything else that defines allyship. I acknowledge that other factors such as trade, diplomacy, and ideological values are important parts of our international relationships, but they should not be confused for alliance. We can see that on their own, these factors are not sufficient enough to constitute an ally. Consider Russia. Is it an ally? Certainly not. In fact, it is the opposite, a foe, precisely because we are in indirect military conflict. What about Thailand? We trade with them, both constitutional monarchies, we have similar democratic values, but no military alliance. And so they are friends, of course, but no one would call them an ally. And what about France, Germany, Poland, and the EU as a whole? They are major allies, but why? As we have just seen, trade and values are not enough. It is because we are a part of NATO. Which brings us to America. Is it an ally? Well, no. By the very definition we've just established, it is our greatest ally. Because fundamentally, the United States is the cornerstone of NATO, which itself is the cornerstone of our security. America's role gives NATO its teeth, its credibility, its deterrent. It is the key reason why member states have seen peace for so long. This alone should be reason enough to answer this question with a decisive yes. But what's more is that the UK's alliance with America is uniquely, staggeringly deeper. I'll give 4 examples that illustrate this. Firstly, Britain's nuclear deterrent, the second most important part of our defence policy. And how did we come to acquire this indispensable asset? Well, the Trident missiles which carry them are made and maintained in America, the result of our shared investment, research and development. Although the Prime Minister can launch these independently, their existence entirely depends on American production. Secondly, and underpinning all of this, is the US-UK Mutual Defence Agreement. It sets out how we exchange information to create the world's deadliest weapons. No 2 other countries share information like this. And since 2024, it is an indefinite agreement, never requiring renewal, without an end date. Thirdly, there is AUKUS. Now, this is not just a case of making a few ships for our good friends, the Aussies. We are creating nuclear-powered submarines, collaborating on the most advanced technologies, including AI, cyber warfare, quantum computing, and undersea drones. It is a long-term strategic alliance aiming to maintain technological military superiority and deter aggression in the Indo-Pacific. And finally, there is the Five Eyes Partnership, where we are part of the most comprehensive and unrestricted exchange of secrets on foreign nations. The truth is, we can have a conversation about values, ideology, and how much they align, but by the single most important measure of allyship, military alliance, we are closer to America than we are any other country. How could we conclude from this anything other than America is the UK's greatest ally? To deny this would be putting present political distaste over reality. However, this reveals a final and more uncomfortable truth. We aren't just in an alliance with the United States. We are dependent on it for our security. The imbalance of power in this relationship may have been palatable when we were sure who America was. Today, as our values increasingly diverge and foreign policy becomes unpredictable, this dependency leaves us vulnerable. Pressured into joining wars we do not believe in, unable to defend ourselves, saying that the sky is green to guarantee favor with an aspiring autocrat. We have become internationally impotent in an increasingly incendiary world. This is evident in Europe today, where a lack of American support for Ukraine has left it vulnerable, emboldened Russia, and set the terms for how we act. Had our defense relationship been as advanced with our European partners, in other words, if Europe were our greatest ally, I believe Ukraine would be in a much stronger position today, and perhaps so would we. The solution is not to abandon our integral American alliance, but to understand it honestly and how we must adapt to it when values diverge while dependencies remain. In conclusion, I urge the room not to allow personal feelings about America today blind us from reality, because only by being honest can we begin to correct the path forward. By any conventional understanding of the term, America is our greatest ally. There is no close second, and that is a problem. Britain's strength now depends on forging equally powerful alliances with like-minded nations.
Okay, thank you, Jack. So that was a really good speech, by the way. Please, any questions? We do encourage you guys to ask each speaker questions because they have prepared a lot. Is there any questions? Yeah.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
You seem to use US's withdrawal of support from Ukraine as evidence of their allyship with us, but that seems like the perfect case where our interests are misaligning so much that we're a far greater threat than we were.
I'm using it as an example of where we are completely and utterly dependent upon America to dictate the terms of our military interventions around the world. But ultimately, we aren't the masters of our own destiny in terms of how we act, because we've essentially given way to our whole foreign policy and military intervention to one country entirely because we are so dependent upon it. But our security is so interlinked that I fear if we don't move away from it, then we're going to be stuck in this position forever where we see partners like Ukraine, values that we want to defend, and we're unable to do so. That's not to say, that's not a negative about, well, it is a negative about America, to be clear, but it's more about understanding the reality that we live in, I suppose. We're confined in this box where our alliance with America dictates our terms and how we act, but we should acknowledge that, and part of my plea to this room today is to acknowledge that very fact, because if we don't, we won't create alliances which are equally as strong with like-minded nations that perhaps enable us to fight for our values more powerfully.
Okay, thank you, Jack. We have a hand up at the back over there.
Thank you. I think the term greatest ally seems to inherently suggest that there is some longevity in the relationship, but your speech also suggests that we should be moving away from the US as an ally towards other partners. How would you address that tension, and how does that marry with the idea that they are our greatest ally when you seem to suggest they shouldn't be in future?
Well, I think they're our greatest ally because we completely depend on them for our security. And by any conventional understanding of the term, alliance is a military one. You know, I think of, what did we call the group of nations that we fought aside in the Second World War? The Allies, right? I don't think I don't think we can move away from that, and I think we should acknowledge that. I didn't say that we should abandon our American alliance. I think it's important that we keep it. But I kind of think the UK's position is that we have, if alliance were a stock, we've betted all in on America. And for years and years, it's gone really well. But now the American company isn't looking so good, and I think we kind of need to diversify our alliances and start investing a bit more elsewhere as much.
Okay, thank you. I think we have a question here.
Thank you. So yeah, just sort of what made me think of that is how you're saying from where allyship originated, and also you mentioned about intelligence. Sorry. I just wondered if you had any comment about how, if the allyship is so strong, the UK ceasing sharing intelligence after America went in with Venezuela, not because it protected our interests, but because it was so abhorrent, the operation that was going on there, if that is something that you would expect to see in something that's called a greatest allyship?
Well, I think it's a sign of the resilience of the relationship that we were able to do that and still believe that we can utterly depend on it when we need it to. I'm glad we did that. You know, you could say it puts our relationship with America at risk doing that. But we were able to stand up for our principles there and still maintain that alliance. So that's good. But when you've got an increasingly unpredictable American leadership, how many times you can perhaps play that card is brought into question.
Okay, thank you. I think there was a question right next to you.
Hi, Ed. So from the way that you describe greatest ally or allyship, you know, and in principle, an alliance is supposed to be on even grounds. Obviously, in reality, that's completely different. But the way that you're describing it suggests that the UK and the rest of Europe is more like a US protectorate rather than an alliance on equal grounds. And I wouldn't necessarily call that great. In fact, I would say that treats Europe like the US's backyard, practically speaking, and that's why the US can get away with bullying Europe all the time. I mean, so what would you say in response to that?
I agree.
From where I'm coming from, I wouldn't call that a great relationship, but I would call that an abusive relationship, frankly.
I mean, I suppose the difficult part here is it's abusive right now, right? Historically, it hasn't been abusive. But this was my point, right? Like, this isn't good for us. But to deny the reality of like what an ally is, someone who is there to protect your security, someone that you fight side by side with when the worst things happen, those are our biggest ones. We're not sharing nuclear technology with anyone else. We're not exchanging secrets on foreign nations to the same degree with anyone else. This is the person we're relying on, and yet they bully us. I'm trying to, I suppose, separate those two things of feeling pretty pissed off about that, while also acknowledging the fact that we are in this situation because we put ourselves there. And if we don't get ourselves out of it, then we're going to be in trouble. But we only get ourselves out of it by acknowledging where we are, which is currently, it is our greatest and most dependable, or rather relied upon, ally.
Hey, we have one more question.
Thank you so much for your speech. It was really like intriguing as well. I really liked your beginning part when you mentioned about how we were allies with, you know, Churchill, Roosevelt, Thatcher, Reagan, Tony Blair, Bush. Like, that was quite interesting. And I was just thinking, God forbid, there was a general election and tomorrow reform gets into power. Do you think that we would still have the statement of, like, you know, is Britain still America's greatest ally? Since we can see that America kind of meddling in our politics as well, like endorsing reform, pushing forward, especially like the marches that we see, you know, we have billionaires who are like funding as well, you know, endorsing it. So do you think the question would still stand with sort of like, you know, do you think it's more like Keir Starmer's not really likable in Donald Trump's kind of eyes, or do you think that still kind of stands?
I think Donald Trump smells weakness, and when he smells political weakness, he thinks that he can exert pressure on them. But to the point of would the relationship still stand, kind of like I was talking about with all those examples of Thatcher and Reagan, Blair and Bush, that is the surface level of the relationship. But the relationship is everything that is underneath it. And all of those things would stay the same. Arguably, the surface level, if you've got a Donald Trump president and a Nigel Farage prime minister, God forbid, but arguably the surface level of the relationship is at a better point again. But I don't think the surface level changes from it, unless some crazy, ridiculous policy happens, but who knows?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
The first person to speak on the opposition side is Nicole.
If we are to have a real conversation about this notion, it deserves nothing less than honesty. So, yes, historically, the US, we can confidently say, can be described as our greatest ally. To suggest otherwise would be a mistelling of history, and we understand an ally to be not just a neighbour or a trading partner, but countries bound by mutual support, by cooperation, by a shared pursuit of common goals. And for a very long time, that's exactly what the US was. And we saw this in the Second World War, we saw this with the Marshall Plan and the dollar being used to share and rebuild a broken Europe. We saw this in the joint architecture of a post-war world order, in the building of the UN, the WTO, the IMF. Institutions co-designed, co-championed, co-funded by both nations to uphold shared visions for how the world should work. And these are remarkable things that we cannot share with any other country. But we're not talking about history, we're talking about the present, and the present tells a very different story. Because recent events have demonstrated clearly and repeatedly that American allyship is no longer something the UK can rely upon. US allyship is a liability. Our most unreliable partner cannot be our greatest ally. Would our greatest ally partner with our greatest threat? The US chose to open direct diplomatic channels with Russia without consulting the UK, despite knowing the economic punches the UK took to enforce sanctions, and in doing so undermined our efforts and legitimized the Russian regime. Would our greatest ally interfere with our democratic sovereignty? The president used his platform to overtly intervene in British domestic politics, to amplify a right-wing narrative on immigration, to attack our prime minister, to call out our armed forces. People who had bled next to American soldiers in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in wars all across the globe, usually led by the US, he was calling them toy soldiers. These are people who died for him. Would our greatest ally actively contribute to the energy shocks destabilizing our economy? The US allied with Israel to launch an attack on Iran. The UK wasn't consulted, wasn't warned, and woke up to national disruption. Iran had openly signaled how it would respond by creating chokeholds of roughly a fifth of global oil and gas, when effectively blocking the Strait of Hormuz. The US continued to attack, despite knowing the impact it would have on the UK and a bunch of its other allies. The UK gas prices doubled in barely a week. We heard warnings of bills rising by £500. Inflation, which had been easing towards 2%, jumped to 3.3%. The burden fell hardest on those stretched by the cost of living. All of this happened without a call to Downing Street. The US, the world's largest oil and gas producer, absorbed almost none of the economic fallout. The US acted, the UK paid. For that to be our greatest ally, I wouldn't know where to begin to describe an enemy. When we argue that the US is our greatest ally, we always fall back on the idea of a special relationship. Churchill coined it, Thatcher and Reagan polished it, Blair and Bush blew it up. But at every turn, it was Britain who bent over backwards to ensure America prevailed. And that often we were paying the expense. We sent troops to Iraq on the basis of intelligence the US provided, and now the world knows was manipulated. 4,000 British service people were deployed. 179 people didn't come home. And the Chilcot inquiry confirmed that the relationship was less of a partnership and more of a pattern of deference. America led, Britain followed. When America needed basing rights in Diego Garcia, we granted it, at the cost of displacing the entire Chagosian population. People removed from their homes so that American military bases could operate without inconvenience. That special relationship was built in part on the displacement of people. Is that the legacy that we want to leave? Are those the alliances that we want to make? When we look at trade, the post-Brexit trade deal with America that was promised and used to justify us departing from the EU, till this day hasn't arrived. Meanwhile, our largest trading relationship with Europe was sacrificed in the name of sovereignty and for a fantasy of UK-US agreements that America never backed with the same enthusiasm. We threw away real, functioning trades for the promise that US can never commit to. I'm not trying to deny the historically significant allyship that we've had with the US, but in the present, Britain finds itself in a relationship where terms are set by the US and sacrifices burdened by the UK. We are told we have a special relationship, but how special is a one-sided relationship? Because from what we've described, this is not an alliance of equals, but rather a relationship characterized by dependency. The UK's greatest ally cannot be its most unreliable. We have consistently reliable partners in Europe, in the Commonwealth, in the global south, in emerging markets. These are relationships built on reciprocity, on respect, on the kind of mutual interests that don't evaporate depending on the administration. The US is not our greatest ally, and it may be amongst our most familiar, but to believe it's our greatest ally is to confuse comfort with commitment.
Thank you, Nicole. It was really good. I'm sure you guys have questions. Who wants to be the first one? Yep, there's a hand there for Tola.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your speech. My question, I suppose, is if you feel that America isn't our greatest ally, who is and why?
I think very similarly to Jack, when he mentioned earlier, I don't think we've put ourselves in a good enough position to deviate from the US. I think we don't have another partner, but I also think that is very much in design in the relationship the US has made with us. They have forced us to be dependent, and they're forcing us to not allowing us to create those trading relationships that we could make. I think it's very dependent on them. I don't think we have a clear view where to go next, but if it was me, we'd go for the biggest market, we'd go for China, or we'd do what the UK is doing now and making those relationships with India, with Nigeria, with markets that are growing and have a potential to grow in a way that the US isn't.
Okay, thank you. Was there a question in front? Were you? Yeah? Here, just.
Hi, thank you. It was really interesting and convincing. I just had a question. I wondered, I agree with a lot of what you've said, but kind of making it this one-sided relationship can kind of take away some of the UK's responsibility in the history of the relationship and kind of make us seem like an innocent bystander. So I guess how would you address the UK's complicity in things like invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, and without just making that the US dragged us in, which I'm not saying it wasn't, but kind of how do we make ourselves responsible as well?
I do think we're responsible. I don't think it's, we're definitely not victims in murdering people unnecessarily. But when the US would have done it with or without us, and I can not understand, but I can put myself in the shoes of the people who made those decisions of, you're going to do it with or without us, and we can now put ourselves in also a better position by supporting you, and it's going to happen anyways. So I don't think you can't justify it, and there is no sort of take responsibility. What we've done, we need to take responsibility for, but it's also bigger than us.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. We have two questions over there.
I think it comes back to the reliability of it. We were able to rely on the US to support us in those scenarios, but just the fact that it's able to treat Ukraine in the way that it is now, what's to say that they wouldn't treat us the same? Especially under this administration, maybe if you were talking under Bush or even Biden, like might been in a better situation, but with the way that like the US elected Trump once, they elected him twice, and that seems like more of a pattern that they're going in that direction of isolationism, or at least in literally America first. So we're not America. They have no loyalty to us. They've shown that in their actions towards other people, and I don't think we need to wait till we're in a position for them to tell us to our face, like we don't give a, do you know what I mean?
Okay, thank you. One over there?
Yeah, not to turn this back into like a semantics issue, but I think your opponent's position is largely predicated on defining greatest allyship in terms of like military security. Is that how you define it as well, or do you have a different view which supports the position that you're trying to argue against?
So you're talking more military-wise?
I would say different terms, just because the impact the US has had upon us and we've had upon it has been more than military. It's been cultural, it's been financial. It is we're so embedded in each other's culture because we are allies. So yes, the military stuff is relevant, but on a day-to-day, I'm not joining the army, but I still am, do you know what I mean? But it's like the actual day-to-day things that affect us is still very influenced by US allyship. So I have to define allyship by its influences in our reality.
Okay, someone has their hand up over here. The guy in the jacket.
Me? Yeah. Yeah, credit to the speakers as well. It's quite daunting speaking in front of everybody about politics. So, yeah. I feel like you put words to the point that I was trying my best to articulate before, which was about almost America being that invisible hand. And I think recognizing the duality that the UK is not innocent in getting involved in these affairs, but also with the new sort of like trade wars and sanctions, this is now financial warfare, which can act as like a strangulation technique on many different economies. And I think since the US overtook UK with when it comes to like foreign policy and like the petrodollar, for instance, now whatever position or moves that they make as a monopoly seems to affect the UK, like you said, with like financially, even for myself, I work in the charity sector, and with Donald Trump's perspective on DEI, it's now affected the funding for the UK charity system. And that probably has a lot of repercussions in many different layers of society. So my question to you is, how can the UK leverage their position as an ally to the US to kind of get back on track?
I think in name, we definitely have this sort of like special relationship, and I think that would be in where we stand to leverage it, but I just don't feel comfortable leveraging or depending on, I guess, our exit plan on the same people that are trapping us in the situation. So I think it's just I think it's less about how we leverage our relationship because we're already in the relationship, like we're already doing it, and more so what can we do next that doesn't mean that we're not dependent on them? What can we do next that doesn't involve them?
Okay, thank you. I think there's someone a few doors down.
I'll be so real. It's not that different. And even in me saying that we should leverage, so I'm Nigerian, and if I was to be up here and speaking on behalf of Nigeria, I'd be saying the exact same things as what I've said about the US to the UK. But if I'm speaking purely devil's advocate, because honestly, so fair play to you, I completely agree. But I think it's speaking purely for the UK needs to work to its best benefit. And I think there are ways we can do that without corrupting or without destroying other nations, but it's just, we can work towards that, but those are, working towards that, this is where we need to work towards doing better. But, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, is there anyone else who has a question? Someone at the back?
For the UK to be in the position that the US is in now? 100% it can. 100% it can. And that's why I'm saying, if we're looking at emerging markets, if you look at the way that China is sort of, don't want to say exploiting, but exploiting a lot of Africa, it is because Africa hasn't reached its full potential, if that makes sense. And if we are going to, I guess, leverage the relationships that we have or to build those relationships, then those are the places to do it. It is in the Commonwealth, it is in emerging markets, but then it brings us back to this point of, like, are we going to become what we're going against? We can, but again, if you are speaking for the UK, fine. But if you are, it's the bad thing, and the same reason we're saying the US is the bad thing. Do you know what I mean? It's not a bad thing for us, but, we're not the only ones.
Okay, yeah. So thank you, Nicole. Give her another round of applause. Yes, thank you, Jack. Thank you, Nicole. I think you guys really set the pace. So we're going to take a quick 15, 20-minute break, get refreshments or a drink, and we'll be back here soon for the next two speakers.
All right, everyone. Thank you again for all coming, and now we're going to be moving to the second half of the debate. I'd like to introduce you all to Indi, who's going to be speaking on the proposition for the motion. Thank you all again.
Thanks very much. Now, I'm not going to lie to you guys. When it was agreed that I was going to be speaking for this motion, I was pissed. I do not like the American government one bit, and I didn't want to come up here and be like, I'm Team America, and I'm definitely not. But then I took a step back, and I realized that liking America isn't what this debate is about. It's not, is America the best country? It's not, is America the most perfect ally? It's, is America the UK's greatest ally? And what that means is when we consider all of the different factors that make an ally great, does the US outperform all of the other allies of the UK? And in the next maybe 4 or so minutes that I have, I'm going to show you why you should think the answer to that question is yes. So let's start off with what actually makes a great ally. And what makes a great ally is a lot like what makes a great friend. So that's someone who shares your values and your interests, someone who is reliable, someone that can protect you, and someone that can, better you, often economically, in the case of states at least. And America scores highly on every single one of those measures. Let's start off with shared values. Both are democracies, they uphold the rule of law, and they also share the sort of same human rights conventions. And that allows this implicit trust between both that allows them to cooperate very easily and frictionlessly. Next up, we have shared interests. Now, the UK and the US interests are perhaps unsavory at times, for lack of a better word, but you have to admit, as we say in Jamaica, they are like Batty and Bench when it comes to their shared interests. And for the non-Jamaicans in the room, that means they are inseparable. Take, as you mentioned, the US and UK invasion of both Iraq and Afghanistan. Do I agree with them? No. But did both countries want to do that? Hell yeah, they did. So they did. And we can think about some more positive shared interests as well. Up until recently, we know that both backed Ukraine against Russia's invasion, both economically and militarily. They also share economic interests. They signed the Atlantic Declaration in 2023, where they agreed to deepen their cooperation on things like critical on aid and, critical minerals. That's the right word, right? Yeah. So yes, perhaps their shared interests aren't always aligned. Perhaps they're not always the best, but they are often aligned on them. And next up, the big one that Nicole rightfully pointed out is a little bit shaky at times, and that's reliability. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that Trump isn't perhaps the most unreliable president we've had in modern history, but Trump doesn't make up the entirety of the US government, nor does his presidency make up the entirety of the UK and US's relationship. And actually, when we think about it, those fundamentals still remain. Both have been NATO allies since 1949. Both have benefited from nuclear information sharing and sort of growing those nuclear arms through the mutual aid agreement. And not just that, but the UK and the US have signed trade agreements. Trump signed his first trade deal with the UK, and we were one of the few countries not to be hit with heinous tariffs. We managed to negotiate our tariffs on our cars down from 27.5% to, I think it was, put it written down, to 10%. And similarly on goods generally from 9.2 to 1.8%. So is Trump unreliable to some of our allies and on the global stage? Yes. But actually towards the UK, he's been pretty stable. So let's consider our next thing, and that's protection. And that's where I think the US's strength and alliance to the UK really, really shines. The US has the highest military expenditure of any country globally. In 2025, they made up 1/3 of global military expenditure. So that's one country and 1/3, and the UK benefits massively from that. That's money that we don't necessarily have to fork out because the UK is there to protect us. Not only that, but as we mentioned, both are members of NATO, which means that an attack on one is an attack against all. And as one of the world's largest military power, that means that we benefit from that. And moving on to the final, but definitely not least important factor, and that's, does the US benefit us? Does it make us a better country? And the answer to that is yes. The US is the UK's largest trading partner. They contributed to around 30% of all UK trade last year. The next country, who was the largest UK trading partner, was Germany. Do you know how much they contributed? Just 8%. So when we think about who else could an ally be, it's definitely not someone like Germany who can't benefit us economically in the same way. It's definitely not a country like France who can't benefit us militarily in the same way. So I'd like to take you back to where we started. I'm not asking you to love America. I'm not asking you to defend every war, every policy, the crazy what's it man who's currently in power. What I am asking you to do is to say that when we think about all of the different traits that make up a great ally, America shines on them. A great ally shares your interests. America does. A great ally helps protect you. America does. A great ally stands with you over time. America has. And a great ally strengthens your economy, which America does. So if you agree with all of those points, and you agree that no other country can match up to those, then I implore you to agree with me that America is the UK's greatest ally.
Wow, thank you, Indi. That was great. Yeah, a lot to take in. Any questions? Please, questions, guys. Yeah, someone over there?
Yeah, I'm definitely not pro-capitalism, and I do think that neoliberalism probably hasn't benefited the average person, but what I do think is that both the US and the UK state, when we think about allyship, we're really thinking about the states there, is what does, where they are aligned and they do share that interest of neoliberalism and advancing capitalism. And if we are to even then look at the individual person, even under capitalism, which is the state that we are in, we need an economy to benefit, a healthy and thriving economy to benefit the everyday person. And the reality is the US is the world's largest contributor to our economy. They have the largest share of inward investment into the UK. And without that, the UK economy would cripple and it would harm the average person. So yes, capitalism as a structure is harmful, but the reality is 99% of the countries that we have globally are capitalist. Therefore, 99% of our allies, I don't even know if we are allied with non-capitalist countries, probably not. So all of our allies, therefore, are capitalist. And that's not necessarily a measure which we can use to differentiate America as an ally versus others.
Okay, someone here at the front, yeah.
I guess sort of two parts. The first is I don't think Keir's sort of shift from his initial stance on Iran was necessarily a result of pressure. I think it was a result of the attack on Cyprus, and therefore their allyship with Cyprus necessitating that sort of involvement, rather than, because I think Keir's probably a little bit wet, a little bit weak, but has done a fairly good job at resisting Trump's demands whilst also still being diplomatic. But where I see sort of that relationship evolving, I definitely do think that the over-dependence isn't perhaps the most beneficial. I think the best relationships don't have that level of dependency. I don't know how necessarily you move away from that, but I don't think that means that negates the strength of the alliance. I don't think there is another country that can still benefit the UK in the same way. And I think that the US is still very heavily dependent on the UK support, even if we don't benefit them as much as they benefit us.
Yeah, do you have a follow-up question? Okay, quick one, yeah.
That's a good point. So then perhaps in terms of, that's a good point. I don't think that they are necessarily leading us down this path of being crippled. I don't think that we are entirely, it's not like America says jump and we say how high. We do exercise a level of sovereignty. If you take, for example, again, the level of cooperation that Trump wanted in the Iran war rather, we haven't given that. Sorry, Jack, if I'm going to steal one of the points we were talking about earlier. The Vietnam War, for example, we didn't have involvement in that. There's a lot of things which the US government has demanded our involvement in, but the UK has kept its sovereignty. An alliance that we have doesn't necessarily demand that we're always aligned with what they're doing, what they ask of us. Granted, under Trump, it becomes a bit more difficult, but again, Trump's presidency is over in what, like a couple of years? And our alliance has withstood the test of time, so I think that, yeah, it will continue to do so.
I actually have a question. Do you think it's worth the risk that Keir Starmer said no to Trump initially, if they are our greatest ally?
Yes, because I think that when we have said no to him on perhaps smaller asks, for example, Greenland as well, he didn't have our support on that. We've seen that there's not actually much he's willing to do compared to other nations. I think that speaks to the strength of our allyship, the fact that he's willing to say to some other nations, I'm going to slap these tariffs on you, or I'm going to harm you in this way, but to the UK, he doesn't do the same. So I don't think, and given the gravity of the situation, what it would mean for us to get involved, yeah, definitely the risk, number one, isn't really there, and if it was, I still don't think it's worth us killing people, essentially over some Trump's vindictive agenda. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Yes, someone in the middle. Oh, okay, I can shout.
Do you think that by building ourselves up militarily, economically, in the way that America demands us to, do you think that will actually strengthen like the allyship, or do you think it will push us away from it because it may give us a reason to, establish our sovereignty more?
I think it would push us away from dependence, but I don't think it would push us away from allyship. I think definitely military aspect of allyship is probably the most crucial. It's about protecting yourselves, and there's lots of other things you can do independently without the support of others. But the fact that America gives us a lot of soft power, and they are the sort of face of some of the global institutions such as the World Bank, the IMF. They give us a lot of voice and power in those arenas. So even without that military power, and if we do have that sovereignty, we'll still need that allyship for those other sort of elements.
Someone in the corner at the back.
So to clarify, basically our overdependence on America for protection, is that a security risk? And yeah, is that? I do think it is a security risk, but again, I don't think that bears weight on the motion of whether they or not they are the greatest ally. There are risks inherent in any sort of alliance and relationship, and you can definitely work to move away from them and have more sovereignty over those sort of key elements. But I think that because America is, at least at this point, fairly reliable towards us, at least, and because we have had that long-standing relationship with them, that risk isn't to the degree that it's completely crippling us. I mean, the UK has still been fine, like now almost 2 years into Trump's presidency. So I don't think that it's bears weight on the motion, basically.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And yep, someone in the middle.
I was just going to say, a lot has been said about the military relationship with America. But do you think that if Britain got invaded tomorrow by Russia, do you think America or France and Germany would be quicker to defend us?
I think France and Germany would want to defend us and be quick to defend us, but how much they'd actually be capable of doing is probably little, shown by the fact that there's had to be this coalition of the willing in response to sort of US's backing off of support that still can't get enough to the support of Ukraine. And obviously the UK is a smaller country, but perhaps would need more support. So maybe more willing, but again, it comes back to the importance and the strength of that military power, that you can want to do things all you like, but if you don't have the power to, then the allyship is kind of useless. Not useless, but lacks a little bit of oomph.
Yeah, and I think even like to your question, in moments where all our lives are in danger and are a threat, we would want the biggest people, no matter how much they agree with us, to protect us, and the people who have the most resources. And currently, it does look like the US, and as I think Indi said, whether like we agree or not,
I think in times of like threat, when many of us haven't probably had to really have to experience that, we'd really want the quickest people and the people who could do the most damage, or the people who could protect us, to help us the fastest way that they could.
But America would always question, does this benefit us? Like, they would always ask that question of themselves first, whereas I don't think France and Germany would.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think that countries are inherently self-interested. Maybe the degree to which is different, especially in the current sort of presidency. Trump is definitely more America first than France and Germany, but I don't think France and Germany would run to our savior if it wasn't in their benefit in some way. I think the reason that we are allies with them is because the preservation of Europe as a whole is beneficial for them.
But it would so obviously be to their benefit because they're such a geographic neighbour of us. Like, they would be more threatened, whereas America could think, oh, we could probably get away with it being. I mean, America. Sorry, it's not very clear.
Yeah.
America has a lot of vested interest in what we do, like a lot of US investment.
Yeah, so I think in terms, to both of your points, I think geographically, obviously European countries have lots of those shared interests, but when it comes to economically, that's where the US's interests are, very core and aligned. I appreciate all the support from not even having to argue anymore. It's great.
Okay, thank you, Indi. Everyone, round of applause for her, please. And to our last speaker of the night, we have Ismael.
So in our earlier argument, we outlined the basis of what makes an ally. It's a partnership between two countries founded on mutual support, cooperation, and the pursuit of shared goals. Now, with this in mind, I'd like you all to ask yourself a question. Would your greatest ally exploit your vulnerabilities? On this side of the house, we believe that the US is not the UK's greatest ally because we are at its mercy. An ally is not one we should be at the mercy of, and crucially, our greatest ally should expand the UK's freedom, expand its resilience and its options, not create dependencies. And it's, I suppose, this theme of dependency and asymmetry is something that I hope to discuss with you across this evening, assuming I have enough time. But starting off with our first pillar, security and defense. Now look, we're often told that the US is our ultimate security partner. And it absolutely is. We see this across NATO, as our proponents have argued, across intelligence sharing, and even in some of the kit that we use across our military. But at what cost? At what cost to our sovereignty? And sovereignty here refers specifically to the UK's ability to safeguard its national interest independently. I'd like to point you all to a clear example of the UK's dependency on the US, specifically our own nuclear deterrent program, Trident. Trident is almost entirely dependent on American technology, infrastructure, and cooperation. And in case you didn't know, sorry. In case you didn't know, our nuclear missiles are not even made in the UK. They're not even owned by the UK. They're leased from an American stockpile out in Georgia. And the UK, we need to send our submarines out to the States to get them serviced and maintained. Now, what does this show? If it should show you anything, it proves that our nuclear deterrent, our ultimate security guarantee, is not entirely self-sufficient. It's wrapped around an American leash. How sovereign is our nuclear deterrent if it's not really ours? On this side of the house, we believe our deterrent, our nuclear deterrent, our ultimate security guarantee, should be credible on its own terms. Because fundamentally, if a foreign power holds the key to your survival, it also holds the key, well, it holds a permanent veto on your freedom, each and every one of you. And again, this isn't to say that we hope to use nukes anytime soon. But what it does show is that we shouldn't rely so heavily on other states' systems for our own security. Because fundamentally, what good is an army if we don't have the tools to defend us? What good are our bullets if we don't own the guns to shoot them, that fire them? And how secure is our deterrent if it's outsourced to another power. As a country, our deterrent shouldn't be so structurally dependent on the US because it doesn't just degrade our autonomy, it exposes us to exploitation. And this comes at a time when the world is especially, or rather the US allyship, our allyship with the US is especially unreliable. Now, this theme of dependence and asymmetry isn't just exclusive to our security architecture. We also see it across our economy, which leads me to my second point. The US holds an enormous amount of leverage across our economy. And it has repeatedly demonstrated its willingness to use that leverage in pursuit of its own interests. Now, obviously, this shouldn't come as much of a surprise. The US is, of course, the world's largest economy and would, like any other country would, look to pursue its economy. But should the US grow its economy at your expense? At our expense? And we don't even need to look that far to see this in action. We only need to look to last April on Liberation Day. We need to look at when our greatest ally treated us, how our greatest ally treated us when its own economy was on the line, and when it was politically convenient for Washington, they slapped sweeping tariffs across British goods, British cars, British steel, our biggest exports to the US. This again proves another fundamental truth. Our allyship with the US does not stop it from applying economic pressure when its own interests dictate it. And a relationship on this side of the house stops looking equal when one side can pressure the other at will. Now, again, I'm not going to try and equate the UK economies with that of the US's. But how much of a great ally is the US if it can unilaterally distort our own economy? Without boring you on the numbers and the stats, UK goods exports to the US averaged at about £4.7 billion a month between April 2025 and February this year, down from a 2024 average of about 5.5 billion. And goods exports fell by 25% in April 2025 following the tariffs. Now, how does this affect us here at home? It means less growth for you, fewer jobs for you, and less business confidence for all of us. And according to analysis from Aston University up in Birmingham, even if we wanted to retaliate against the US with our own trade war, every single European country would be worse off, including here in the UK. So this issue isn't just endemic to the UK, it's endemic everywhere, this theme of dependence and asymmetry. And this asymmetric relationship is a vulnerability. It exposes us to exploitation. It's a lever that the US can pull to choke our economy and remind us of our dependency. Because when the US brings us to the table, we do not sit as equals. Worst of all, we're expected to accept crumbs. And this is just one example of our vulnerability. Because the US has proven that it can choke our economy, and we all know there's nothing stopping it from choking our security and our nuclear deterrence when political winds change. So let's return back to the same central question I asked earlier. Would your greatest ally exploit your vulnerabilities? I think so. It has, and it will. Because throughout this debate, we have shown that the relationship between the UK and the US is not one of equal partners. It's a relationship where our security depends on American systems. It's one where our economy can be choked at will, and where our sovereignty is constrained by structural dependence. Of course, the US is indeed our closest ally, perhaps our most powerful, one of our most powerful partner. But power is not the same thing as allyship, because the motion tonight isn't, is the US important to the UK? No. And it's not, do we cooperate with the US? It's whether the US is our greatest ally. And a great ally should make you stronger without making you dependent. It should expand your freedom, not narrow your options. And the greatest ally should not leave you in a vulnerable position to coercion. And that, I suppose, is the fundamental issue with our relationship with the US. Because the closer we move towards dependency, the further away we move from sovereignty. And no country should place its security, its prosperity, its strategic freedom so heavily on the hands of another state, no matter how friendly that state may seem today. Because if one nation ultimately holds leverage over our missiles, our markets, and the means to pressure us at will, then it's not an equal alliance, it's reliance. And reliance is not what a great ally should demand from us. And for those reasons, I urge you all to oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ismael. A great speech, by the way. And so over to you guys. Any questions for him? Yeah, Kai?
Similar question to last time. If it's not America, who is our greatest ally? And you kind of mentioned the talking point about America sets the rules that we kind of have to follow because of the dependency. One would then argue, could argue that whilst we were in the EU, we had the same issue where we weren't making our own rules or our own processes. It was all decided in Brussels, where we didn't have power to actually control the decision making there. So in that same instance, would you not say the EU wasn't an ally to us there because we didn't have influence on top of the rules?
No, I wouldn't. It's a good question, and I need some time to think. I think fundamentally this goes back to what I said earlier about dependence and asymmetry. Now, you just said that we're still subject to some of the rules that the EU might have imposed on us on a supranational level, and we're kind of somewhat seeing those consequences from the US in a way. Am I right? I think the difference is the dynamic between our relationship, because when we still had a seat in the EU, we still had a voice, and that voice translated into policy action or decision making. We don't see that with our relationship with the US, and that's because of the fact that we don't sit as equals. Our relationship is entirely asymmetric, and it's shifted towards the US. So when the US makes a decision, when it makes a political decision, we kind of feel a lot of the consequences in a disproportionate manner, and we don't see that in the same way where we might have had in our relationship with the EU. And to your earlier point, honestly, I don't know who our greatest ally should be. I'm not a foreign policy major, but well, I suppose I kind of am. But the point I'm trying to make is that we shouldn't rely so heavily on our alliance with the US. When it comes to our ability to build trading relationships or partnerships or alliances more specifically, they should be far more flexible, and it shouldn't put us at a disadvantage based on how symmetrical or asymmetric that relationship is. So in terms of who we could consider, it could be, as Nicole mentioned earlier, building warmer relationships with the emerging markets, the global south. And this isn't to say that China should be our ally, but it should be a partner that we should consider where our interests do align, and there are plenty of examples where that is the case, whether that's renewables, critical minerals, as Indi mentioned earlier. They do control more than 90% of the market, and there is room for us to build those strategic sectors here at home and, I suppose, collaborate with them where it does make sense. So it's about dynamism, not strict structures and alliances.
Quick one, yeah?
Well, the question is, who is our greatest ally now, not who should be our greatest ally. I just wanted to clarify, because China isn't our ally now. These smaller things aren't our allies in the same respect now, but maybe they should be right now.
Well, I mean, back to my earlier point. On this side of the house, we define an ally as a partnership between two countries based on shared shared values, cooperation, and the pursuit of shared goals. And we only need to look to over the past year that that relationship between us and the US has been entirely divergent. Some of our values have changed. And if that's the case, can we truly call the US our greatest ally based on that divergence and based on that unreliability? An ally should be all of those things and consistently be those things. And the US has proven that it hasn't been and has the capacity to endanger us directly, whether it's causing a global energy price shock, which is affecting our most vulnerable communities here in the UK, those who can't defend themselves. And I personally wouldn't call someone, a country who's capable of doing that, our greatest ally. Our greatest ally shouldn't be any of those things.
Okay, so yeah, just to confirm, USA is not our greatest ally, but we're not too sure who would our greatest ally be. There's a point in the back.
No, I was just going to circle. I was just going to say, I was a bit of a politician's hat there. I was a straight answer, and you couldn't give us one, so that's the answer.
We will have time to like open up the floor, but this is strictly for questions. So yeah, there's a question down here. Hi guys, sorry, bring it back. Thank you.
I think the question of who is the UK's greatest ally has come up a lot, and I'd just like to know from you, do you think the UK or any state actually needs to have someone designated greatest ally, their best friend, effectively, not to infantilize it, but do you think that the UK needs a greatest ally? Could it not just be a collective of interdependent allies, all of whom are, not to sound really cringe, but all great in their own way?
I don't necessarily think that's a cringe question. And to some extent, I actually do agree with you. I don't think we necessarily need to designate any country as our greatest ally, because the world is simply, it's way more chaotic now. Like we can't, I suppose we shouldn't put ourselves in the position where we're so dependent on one single partner, or one single ally. What we should pursue instead is a series of flexible relationships that benefit the UK directly, that are mutually beneficial to some of those countries that we establish those mutually beneficial relationships with. Now, I think the lady in the back, I can't really see her face, but she said that was a political tap dance. It wasn't. I do truly wish I was in a position to answer the question that warrants, I don't know, the amount of quality that you might want. I would probably say it's the EU. On the basis that they're our closest, like literally geographically closest trading partners, and we do share some of the same threats. Like often we hear that, an enemy of my enemy, sorry, what is it? Some. That's the one. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, and we share quite a few enemies with Russia on our borders, interacting with sabotaging our subsea infrastructure and interfering with our political processes. And so there is a lot of scope for aligning ourselves with the EU, with our European partners to I don't know, develop and shore up that strategic autonomy that's away from the US, because as I've said earlier, as Nicole has said earlier, as even the proposition has admitted, the US has proven itself to be an unreliable ally, and we can't necessarily call being an ally, you can't equate being an ally with unreliability. An ally needs to be dependable, it needs to be reliable and consistent, and the US has proven itself not to be. Does that answer your question? On that point, God damn it, Toby. God on that point, I think if we look at Trident, which is the nuclear missiles you're referring to, I see it as an extension of the US's ability to coerce and exploit some of our vulnerabilities. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, they may have entrusted us with the leasing of these materials, but they might have also had the intention to maintain us in a position of dependency and vulnerability to their own advantage. And the reason I mention that is because, as Indi mentioned earlier, the US is our greatest, not ally, trading partner. And at 30%. Now, having a third of your economy dependent on just one partner is a vulnerability. And the US has shown through the use of its tariffs last year that it can choke our economy. So the fact that they've given us these nuclear missiles, if anything, you might see it as a badge of honor or a badge of our allyship, but I just see it as a leash around our military. And I'd urge all of you to see it that way as well, because as it has proven itself, it can choke our economy, and there's absolutely nothing stopping it from choking our nuclear deterrent capabilities.
Just to add on to that though, by our own discretion is a bit of a stretch. There is no way the US would ever allow us to launch missiles without their approval. So we don't have sovereignty over that. So that's not true.
We will open it up later. This is just for questions from the audience, and then we'll have a open discussion. Ooh.
Where'd you get your data?
Okay. We'll open up to the audience. Audience, please, questions, quick, please. Someone at the back. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Quiet down, please. Thank you. Yeah.
Hello. I mean, I'm not denying that there are instances where the US has proven itself to be, you know, a useful trading partner, but it's also proven itself to be a reckless trading partner. And we only need to look at Iran, where they've, in partnership with Israel, launched a campaign against Iran, which has impacted the Strait of Hormuz and led to energy price shocks across across the world. And that has a material impact on literally everyone in here. And hopefully, I'm speaking for myself, but I'm quite privileged in the sense that I'm somewhat a bit isolated from some of the impacts that might have had on most people, but a lot of people aren't. A lot of people are paying the prices. A lot of people might need to judge between food or heating this winter. And again, this comes back to whether the US is our greatest ally, and how do you define ally? Because on this side of the house, an ally shares your values, your cooperation, and a pursuit of the same goals. This absolutely isn't a goal of ours, it's a goal of theirs. And that, I don't know, it compromises what a true great ally is, and it's not the US.
Okay, thank you. We'll have 2 more questions, and then we're going to open up to see if you want to ask any questions from any of the people here. So yeah, someone at the back.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. You know what I'm going to say yet. To answer your question, I actually think it's that mentality that puts us in a vulnerable position, because as Jack and Indi have mentioned, you know, you can talk as much as you want about the benefits of this allyship, but the fundamental truth is that it does erode our autonomy and you know, kind of evaporate some of our freedoms. It makes us dependent on the US. It makes us almost an extension of the US, like a vassal. So you can talk about the benefits of having an allyship, but what good is that if it erodes our sovereignty?
I guess my point is that we're aware that it happen. Like, I don't think it's a case where they're eroding our sovereignty. I think it's a case where the UK knows that we don't have these things and we're not sticking to our values, so we just want to partner with the biggest, strongest,
And that in and of itself is a sign of weakness. And I don't believe in weakness, I believe in strength. And I think strength here means pursuing the ability to be more self-sufficient, to reduce your dependency on the US and improve our independence. Because if we just look at nuclear weapons, we've got countries like France that operate their own independent nuclear programs, Russia, China. I could name 3 or 4 more depending on where you align politically. But fundamentally, they all operate their own self-sufficient nuclear programs. And we have the capacity to do that ourselves, but we choose to blindly follow the US to our detriment. It does erode our sovereignty, it does reduce our freedom, and it does eviscerate our autonomy.
Thank you, Ismael. One last question from the middle. Yeah? So what do you see the shift going towards? Okay.
I think that's a really good question. I think it's a very difficult question as well. But I'll try and answer it as well as I can. I think so. Over the past few decades, if we look at just our defense, we've relied heavily on American equipment and the assurance of American protection in the face of threats from, I don't know, Russia, for example, through I don't know, our alliance through NATO. And as the current administration has proven, not just once but twice, because let's not forget that this also happened in 2016. Trump has threatened to pull out of NATO in pursuit of, I don't know, trying to promote more military spending from its European partners. And I reckon that that's something that we're going to see more of in the next few decades, because even if we just look at Ukraine, for example, I mean, Trump he humiliated him last year in the Oval Office, but also he withheld intelligence sharing and some, I don't know, the distribution of I don't know, movements of Russian Trump troop movements. And from a European lens, if anything, this just shows that the US has the capacity to bully who we should believe its long-standing allies. And how does that translate into policy action here in the UK? Well, we've seen this in Germany, that record military spending levels. We're seeing it in France, but we're also seeing it here. There's far more emphasis on shoring up those defense capabilities here at home rather than having them imported here in the UK. We're building alliances with, or partnerships, development research partnerships with, I think it's Italy and Japan, to develop the next generation of stealth fighters. I think it's called the Tempest program, which you can Google online. And as well as that, even from an EU level, we're trying to develop more of our own satellite capabilities as opposed to depending ourselves on American technology. Because if the past 10 years has proved us anything, it's the fact that Europe and the UK as well needs to develop its own strategic autonomy, because the US has proved quite visibly that it's an unreliable partner. So yeah, it means onshoring jobs here from a defense perspective, but from an advanced manufacturing sector, it also means developing the capabilities to make batteries or wind farms, and reducing our reliance on China for those sectors, which is equally as important, because we're seeing the impacts of global energy shocks, the prices of renewable energy per kilowatt hours going down, whether that's through solar or through wind. Yeah, I guess the point I'm trying to make is the shift is developing the capacity and capability of developing our own defense and industries here at home, rather than offshoring that out through foreign powers. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, everyone?
Okay, thank you, Ismael. Yeah, so we've heard from all four speakers, great points. We're going to open up the floor now so you guys can ask some more questions. Probably lay off Ismael for maybe 2-3 minutes. Then you can ask any of the speakers questions, but also if you just have any statements or you feel like something you want to share, please do that as well. And then we will vote for the motion, for and against. America is the UK's greatest ally. So yeah, any statements, any more questions? This is your time. Someone there, yeah?
This question is to Ismael.
No, give Ismael a 2-minute break. Someone else. No other questions, no other statement? Yep. Okay. Okay, thank you, Amanda. We have someone over here.
A question for you then. No, I don't mean it's even an aggressive way. Let's flip the question. Is the UK the US to its ally? Okay, so that's absolutely good. Absolutely.
So when you think about the formation of the US, obviously it was a former colony of the UK and fought for its independence. When you look at its value system, its culture, its political system, its model of the UK. And when you think about the post-World War II consensus and what that meant, there was a new international rules-based order set up. A lot of that was predicated on British values. So you can't really say that the country who for the last 50 or 60 years has enforced that international rule-based order doesn't see the country that actually started that international rules-based order as its greatest ally. Because where would it derive its moral legitimacy from, if not the ideas that Britain has like spread themselves?
I think, you know what, I'll leave it. You know what? Sorry, yeah.
I think that America doesn't necessarily work on the same level. So like, I don't think America does allyship. I think America picks and chooses who serves their purpose for what they're trying to do. So I think, I understand what you're saying to me, but I don't think like it's like a binary value system that exists across time. At one point in history, that may have been the case where America did need the UK. But I think right now it's like, well, we need you because we need access to this military base. But if, for example, France is more important, then that's what America will base its interactions on. So I don't think the UK is necessarily America's biggest ally, because I don't think America really does allyship. It does what serves itself at that moment in time. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
It does answer my question, but then it begs that it suggests the idea that the allyship is only one way and not both ways.
Yeah.
And Tobi suggested the idea that the allyship is both ways.
I don't agree. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we have someone here, yep.
Yeah, I think in what you're saying, based on that, it's not an exchange, that's not allyship, because it's a one-sided relationship. But I also think the origin of the culture and the direction of the culture is two different things. So even though Britain was a founding father in Americans' perception of democracy, it became its own thing with like the manifest destiny, the city on the hill, the saving the world, responsibility, white savior complex. It became something completely different. And then where it's needed in the UK is something completely different as well. But I think it's also worth mentioning that the US hasn't got it perfect as well, and that they're ticking time bomb internally within itself. Because where the UK is following privatization and selling like national assets, and then you see the income gaps between classes grow as well, that's also crippling them. Now we're looking at privatizing our NHS, we've sold our water as well, and of course shit. So like, there's more things that are coming when it comes to like leases and land, like the whole of Canary Wharf is owned by Qatar. You see what I'm saying? That's the financial hub of what it's supposed to be, one of the financial hubs of London. So I feel like there are deeper issues at play, like structural issues in like considering the US as a monopoly, but also seeing that they're failing internally as well.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we have a hand at the back, yeah?
I feel like the question of America's questionable alliance has only come into play because Trump is in power. So in a couple of years, God willing, Trump doesn't get his way, and we get somebody new in power, are we still looking at America as somebody who should continue to be our strongest ally? Or are we looking to move away from it completely and just find a whole new people or groups of alliances to have in our pockets?
Anyone want to answer that?
I'll drop a quick point on that. I feel the question between the relationship between America and the UK has been a long-standing question before Trump came into power, with that strategic misalignment, with pulling them into certain phases of like economic decline. Like you are working with a power who prioritizes gaining power
I mean, you guys will have time to discuss this after. We're gonna move on to so other people can speak. There's someone. It's okay. Thank you for your point. There's someone at the front. Yeah. Anyone of the speakers want to answer that one? Yeah.
I'll always take any given opportunity to speak, unfortunately. I don't necessarily think that we'll sort of move away from that being central. Maybe it evolves, maybe it'll be more about cybersecurity rather than sort of boots on the ground military, as they say. But throughout history, sort of defending a nation in the most sort of fundamental sense has always been there, and the sort of power play that exists between countries is always there. And I think it would be great, and I think we should aspire to a world where we are connected with each other and we do all have the same values and the same interests, and we aren't constantly fighting with one another. But I do think that that power imbalance between countries is inevitable and probably will persist, and the way that that evolves will be different depending on how technology evolves, depending on how globalization evolves and the interdependence between countries. But the reality is the country which has the biggest power to protect itself in whatever way that may be is going to be the most important to be allied with.
I completely agree with you, because I think moving forward, our biggest threats might not necessarily be other nations. I think a lot of the cyber attacks we've been getting that have been targeting like government they probably are linked to other countries, but it's just as easy to have those attacks from private criminals. Like a lot of the, like AI slop, the kind of stuff that's like like really riling up people. A lot of that is done to make money. That isn't, it might, some of those people are in China or in Russia, but they aren't necessarily agents of the state. So I think moving forward, a lot of our issues, even the stuff that we have domestically, like a lot of the reform sort of rhetoric that's coming through, that's sort of moving towards the right wing, isn't necessarily driven by another country, and that sort of like civil war, I think, is a bigger threat than necessarily whether or not, obviously Russia is bad, but Russia is going to attack us if they need to attack us. Whereas if a private entity is creating dysfunction that is attacking us right here, right now, then probably it makes sense to look outside of our allies in how they treat us militarily if our biggest threats aren't necessarily going to be militarily.
I actually have a question. I feel like this conversation would be a bit different if maybe reform was in power, and I mean the answer would be different. So, do you think that that America would be our greatest ally if reform was in power, for instance? Yeah.
I've been saying we're not an ally because we are indebted to them, because they are unreliable, because we are we're at their mercy. And I think with Nigel Farage, he is there for self-interest. He is there to make money. And if America say, do what we need you to do, and we'll give you whatever we need you to do, that is what. So would they be our greatest ally in that scenario? To who? To Farage? Yeah. But we're still in the same situation of us being completely dependent and the everyday person having no benefit from that.
Thank you. Yes, on the front.
Just to push back on that a bit, I would say that with the Greenland crisis that happened earlier this year, Farage was actually getting into an argument with Republicans who insisted the U.S. really needs Greenland, and Farage was complaining, no, actually, this will be really bad for our security, for said, oh, Trump is my best friend. Now he's saying, oh, Trump is doing a really bad thing for Europe, for Britain, and we can't support that.
Okay, we have one last point or question.
So I suppose the thing that's caught me is that on both sides we spoke with a lot of romanticism about state level cooperation or nation level cooperation, and such as Jack spoke about this sort of romance between the leaders of the US and leaders of the UK. And we spoke positively about the defence kind of contracts or the defence relationships that we have with the US. But I don't think at least these companies involved in this, or these companies that are involved in defence between these two countries, can be separated from the overstepping or even domination of not necessarily the American state, but American companies on our public services over here. Such as earlier this week we saw Sadiq Khan opposing Palantir's involvement with the Metropolitan Police and further such issues around the NHS. So my question is towards the proposition. Does the proposition believe we should move the conversation beyond the top level of political collaboration and consider the risk induced on our services here by American companies rather than the government directly? So in fact, whilst you might argue that the American government is our greatest ally, such in foreign policy, are American companies our greatest ally? And I think that is sort of the crux of the issue, which is this corporate interest that govern America overstepping and having a very real impact here today on our public services, on the social fabric here. The White House might be our ally, are these American companies?
Anyone want to answer that quickly? Yeah?
Right, we'll take some turns. I just want to address the kind of your first point about the top level political alliance, because I think this has been a little bit perhaps misconstrued, and particularly when we're talking about Farage and would that make a difference in our relationship. I think the top level relationship between these two figures are signs that we look for as like a beacon that flashes in the media when we can see, oh wow, they're really getting on, that must mean we're really getting on. But it's completely irrelevant, because everything about the relationship is underneath that. And in fact, if anything, the Trump-Starmer relationship is proof that you can have an American president who's bickering off about what he wants, and nothing fundamentally changes, really. And touching on the sort of the point about American companies, I think it's somewhat related to this idea of, well, what are we getting out of the American relationship? And there's been some pushback from this side, which I think is, you know, a fair point to raise, but what are we getting? Well, we aren't the people investing 1/3 of the global economy in military defense. So what we're getting as a result of only spending 2% of our GDP on military defense is 28 days of holiday a year, when Americans only get 2. We're getting social services and free healthcare in the world when America doesn't, because they're spending all of that money on their economy. So, on their military. So I think we need to be, like, if we're having this idea about this is a bad thing, our dependency on America, that's been the main theme. I think we can all agree that our dependency creates concerns, but it also creates state-level opportunity to spend that money elsewhere. And that's what we've got at the moment. So in that sense, yes, I think there's some benefit to American companies' involvement in our economy as well.
I'm going to take a slightly different stance. I definitely think we should be progressing the conversation beyond what it looks like at state level. I think allyship inherently sort of talks about states, but we should definitely think about what companies are doing to our economy. But I don't think that US companies are necessarily any bad than any other capitalist company. I think that the system that we've set up means that a lot of the time that they are quite exploitative, they're very self-interested, and for the few sort of non-governmental organizations, sort of those in the charitable sector, perhaps they are doing, well, not even perhaps they are more beneficial for the UK, but I don't think we can single out US corporations and say that they are the only evil ones.
Okay, thank you everyone for contributing. So we're in the final stage now of the evening. You've heard both stances, you've heard 4 different speakers. So the question is is America the UK's greatest ally? Please raise your cards. Green for yes, based on the arguments that you've heard today and who won today, who you think won. Green for this side and red for this side. Based on the debate today. Yes, based on the debate. I think it's supposed to be green. Okay, so based on the debate today, based on what we've heard today, this side has won, and it seems that America is the UK's greatest ally. So well done. Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, guys, for taking the time out after work. Hi. Thank you. Yeah, thank you guys for taking the time out after work to come here. We hope that you enjoyed the conversations. We hope that hopefully you socialized and met new people anyway, and that you left here, you'll leave here thinking differently about certain things. We do, we do, I know the lines. We do debates here every month, not here, but we do debates every month. It's related to like politics and sometimes cultural stuff as well. Our next debate will be hopefully next month, so please do follow us on our socials. TikTok and Instagram is discourse.collective. We do also host a book club where we speak not just about politics, but just any books in general, mostly contemporary fiction. But our next book will actually be about reform. And it's by a journalist who hopefully should be coming to speak as well. So you can ask the journalist questions about the book as well. So please do go to our Instagram or TikTok to buy your tickets there. So we have 2 events next month, and we hope that we'll be able to see you there. Yes, and thank you to Young Fabians as well. We're gonna give Kieran the mic just to say thank you as well.
Yeah, thank you so much everyone for coming here tonight. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure that everyone else here has as well. I didn't actually have all that much to say, except from if you would like to join the Young Fabians, please do come speak to me. To go over what I said earlier, the Young Fabians is, I think, the oldest left-wing think tank in the country. Anyone is welcome to correct me on that. It is right, thank you very much. But they do a lot of different kind of policy papers, and they've done a lot of work that has actually fed into Labour Party policy and stuff. So if you're interested in that, please do chat to me, or Jack or Nicole, actually, as well, now that they're off the clock. But that's all from me, and thank you so much for coming here tonight, guys. Yeah, thank you. Take care.